Stress-Free Cooking is brought to you by From the sunny Mediterranean comes one of the world's finest olive oils for all your cooking needs. Pompeian extra virgin olive oil, classic Mediterranean, and extra light tasting. Pompeian makes everything better. From our table to yours, O-Pee-Chee Wines, fine wines and spirits from around the world since 1913. Cutco, the world's finest cutlery. Melissa's, the freshest ideas in produce. And Sub-Zero Wolf Appliances.
Hi, I'm Barbara Selig Brown. Welcome to Stress-Free Cooking. Today I made a trip to the farmer's market, so we're going to make some great dishes using produce from the farmer's market. But before I get started, we want to put on our bunny slippers, pour a glass of wine, and we're going to cook together. The wine that I've selected today to go with all of our fruit and produce is a Nero d'Avola. It's from Sicily. It's one of Sicily's best known grapes. It's very rich, very fruity, and I think it'll complement our produce and our fruit from the farmer's market really well. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do is make a quick marinara sauce. So I'm going to add some extra virgin olive oil to about a 4-quart saucepan, and we'll heat it up. I'm going to crush some garlic, so I'm going to take my chef's knife, place it on top of my garlic, and just give it a little whack. It'll make the skin come off nice and easy. It's partially chopped at this point. I just have to take my chef's knife, go over it again, and I just really need a rough chop because the garlic is going to cook down in the extra virgin olive oil and the tomatoes, and it'll just melt right into my sauce. And sometimes they run away from you, but you just get them back. Okay. And once I smell my garlic in my oil, I know that it's time to add the tomatoes. I also picked up some beautiful fresh basil. If you have basil growing in your garden, this is a great recipe to use that basil. Okay. So let's get the garlic going. And once we begin to smell it, we know it's cooking, and I'll add the tomatoes. I don't want my garlic to burn. I don't want it to get too dark brown, or it starts to make my oil have a bitter taste. Now I do have some crushed tomatoes, and they're all ready to go in the sauce. It's always a great idea to have all of your ingredients ready and waiting before you turn on the pan, or if you're baking, before you turn on the mixer. Okay, so I'm smelling the garlic. It's time to add the tomatoes. First, I want to turn the pan down a little bit. Okay, and there we go. Alrighty, let's stir the garlic through the tomatoes. I'm going to add a pinch or two of salt and pepper. And keep your salt in a little bowl on the side of your stove so it's nice and handy and you don't have to worry about using a salt shaker. It's also a lot easier to measure if you have your salt on the side of the bowl. A pinch is about 1/8 of a teaspoon, so it's an easy way to measure if you are measuring salt without a measuring spoon. Okay, we have all of our ingredients in here except the basil, so let's grab that. And just pick a few leaves off the stems, tear them. Basil is something you don't want to cut until the last minute because basil oxidizes or turns black if you cut it too soon. I like a lot of basil in my sauce. And it's really something you can put in to taste. Okay, so we'll stir this through. Now this quick marinara sauce is going to cook for about 10-20 minutes. It's going to be the topping for our oven fried eggplant, which is going to be a little individual eggplant parmesan. But while this is cooking, I want to go on and I want to work on my dessert. We're going to make what I call peaches and cream fruit tart. So let's start on our tart crust because we want that to bake and cool before we make that at the end of our meal. Now it's time to make our crust for our fruit tart. So this is an almond crusted fruit tart. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my almonds in my food processor. I have the steel blade in here, and this will grind up the nuts. Okay, so our nuts are ground up in the food processor. So you put those in first, and then what we want to do is add flour. We had a 1/4 cup of nuts, a 1/4 cup of flour, a cup of oatmeal. I have a teaspoon of cinnamon, and I'm going to mix this well, just give it a little pulse. Once that's mixed, I'm going to start adding ice cold butter. So even though we always want to get all of our ingredients ready in advance, the butter you would leave in the refrigerator so that you can keep it nice and cold. That will give you a nice crumbly crust. So let's get this mixed in. Once you have the butter incorporated, you can add your honey. We have 3 tablespoons of honey. If your honey is a little thick, you can always heat it up. And I'm just going to grab a spatula to help me get the honey out of the measuring cup. Okay. We'll check the consistency of this once the honey is in, and we may need to add a drop or 2 of water. Actually, this looks good. I'm just going to add a drop of water, not too much. It'll bring it together, and then we just pat it into our tart pan. Okay, all set. So scrape down the sides of the work bowl. And then what we're going to do is take this mixture, put your finger in the bottom and hold the blade in. Take this mixture, put it into the removable bottom tart pan. I've sprayed it with a little non-stick cooking spray just to help with removing it from the tart pan. Okay. And a great way to pat this out is to wet your fingers because it's very sticky. So wet your fingers and pat it out nice and evenly. And this will go into a 375-degree oven for about 10 minutes or until it's golden brown and nice and crispy. And that's really all the baking we're going to do for our fruit tart. We're going to make a nice, cool cream filling and top it with fresh sliced seasonal peaches. And that's all there is to it. This can be made ahead if you make all the components separately, but you really don't want to make this too far ahead with the cream on top of the crust, because the crust will get a little soggy. So let's pop this in the oven, and we're going to go back to our eggplant parmesan. Now it's time to finish that eggplant parmesan. So let's take an eggplant. When you buy an eggplant, you want it to feel heavy in your hand. That means it's nice and fresh, full of water, and just the way you want it. Cut off the 2 ends. We want to cut the eggplant into about 1/2-inch thick slices. Once it's all sliced, you want to use a nice big chef's knife so that it goes all the way through the eggplant without removing the knife. Now let's give it a little salt. Salt brings the moisture out of the eggplant to the surface so the eggplant doesn't absorb too much of anything like oil, even though we're not really using oil on this. But in general, when you're cooking eggplant, you want to salt it so that if you are putting it in some oil, it doesn't absorb too much oil. Okay, so we'll let that sit for a second while I move over and season my breadcrumbs. I have about 3 cups of breadcrumbs, about a 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese, add some salt and pepper, a couple of pinches, fresh ground pepper, and we're going to mix the breadcrumbs well. And now we're going to crack some eggs. So large eggs into a nice flat bowl, crack them on a flat surface. That way you don't push any shell back into the egg. And just scramble them with a fork or a whisk, whatever you have. Since this is a low-sided bowl, I'm just going to use a fork. So scramble those eggs with a fork, and now we'll just make sure that we rub that salt into the eggplant. Okay. And eggplant goes into the eggs. We have a parchment lined baking sheet ready to place it on. And into the breadcrumbs. Press it down a little bit. This will go into a 425-degree oven about 8 to 10 minutes. And then we're going to top it with marinara sauce and a little bit of Italian cheese. It gets a little messy. This is a great thing to do with kids. They like to get into the messy part. This eggplant is also great if you just serve it as a side dish, just this breaded eggplant. I just recently made this with the Girl Scouts. We went to the farmer's market, did a little farmer's market visit, and came back to my house and had a Girl Scout cooking class. And so I had 15 and 16-year-old girls making eggplant parmesan, pasta with fresh sauteed vegetables, and they just had ice cream and peaches for dessert. But it was a great day. We had a really good time. Kids love to cook. Pop this into the oven, wash your hands, and while that's cooking, we're going to go on and start our next dish. The next dish I'm going to make is called Chinese long bean pasta. This was made by a friend of mine. His mother used to make this in Italy all the time. She used Italian green beans, but since he had trouble finding Italian green beans one year, he decided to do it with Chinese long beans. Chinese long beans are these really long beans. They're usually sold in better grocery stores. They can be a little tough. They're very earthy, so they're really good in this dish. They blend really well with the tomatoes, but they're really tough. So I've boiled my beans ahead. I boiled them for about 8 minutes or so just to tenderize them, but they still maintain that nice earthy flavor, which is great. You could use green beans in this dish. If it's the dead of winter and you don't have fresh green beans available, you could also use a really good quality frozen green bean that you've rinsed off a little bit. So this pasta dish I've had the privilege of having at Val and Lori's many, many times, and I'm going to try and do it justice here in my kitchen. So Val shared his recipe with me, and we need a clove or two of garlic. We're going to use 2 cloves because this 1 clove of garlic is very small. So place your garlic on a cutting board, give it a little whack with your chef's knife. Take the skin off. Make sure you have plenty of room on your cutting board. That's always one of your best tips, is not to have your cutting board overcrowded. Okay, so we get the skin off. Garlic, when it's really fresh, can actually be very, very sticky. Garlic is one of the easiest things to grow. In fact, what you do is in the fall, you plant your garlic and you mulch it really well. There's a lot of garlic festivals in the fall, so if you go to garlic festivals, you can get all different varieties of garlic to plant just in time for the fall planting season. Let's roughly chop this garlic. And then I'm going to mince an onion. And whenever we're cutting anything round, we want to make sure that we make it flat so it's easier to cut. And this onion is really big. I really only need half of this onion. You want a medium onion, or about 3/4 of a cup to 1 cup of onion. Leave the stem end on. It'll hold the onion together. And then just peel it. And sometimes there's one little sticky part there. And then with a nice sharp knife, you make some horizontal cuts. And then some vertical cuts. This way you'll get a nice even dice. And that looks pretty good. If there's any pieces that are a little too large, just take your knife and run right over it again and cut them in half. So I'm going to take a nice large pan, add some extra virgin olive oil, turn the heat on, just enough oil to cover the bottom of the pan, onion,